Hello, Internet! Seth Skorkowski, and today we'll be discussing the Call of Cthulhu adventure Blackwater Creek. Written by Scott Dorward and published by Chaosium, Blackwater Creek is the first of two adventures appearing in the 7th edition Keeper's Screen Pack. The second adventure, Miss Dews, appears to be a fine scenario. However, I haven't run that game and just don't feel right reviewing it until I've given it a spin. So this review will only be over Blackwater Creek. Now, first things first, let's look at the cover. While 7th edition has impressed me with its cover art, Blackwater Creek earns a solid meh. Instead of a full-color evocative image, we have a green and black picture of a disheveled guy in the rain vomiting into the mud. Having spent my late teens and early 20s partying on the Ren Fair circuit, this image reminds me of a drunken Rennie rather than the sanity-crushing horrors that grace many of Chaosium's other titles. Fun fact, the official term for a guy who stumbles into your camp and pukes everywhere is a vomit goblin. Who said my videos aren't educational? Underwhelming covers aside, Blackwater Creek has a whole lot going for it. Coming in at 38 pages, with several more pages dedicated to handouts and pre-generated characters, it's pretty stout. But what I really dig about this adventure is that there are two very different ways that it can be played. The first is the more classic Miskatonic University investigation. The second is a bootlegger adventure where the characters are criminals. Being a huge fan of crime fiction myself, I do write it after all. I love that the players have the option of being on the wrong side of the law. What makes this particularly cool is that each storyline arms the characters with a completely different set of goals and information at the beginning, leading to vastly different game experiences. Because it can be played these ways with different character quests, this module is very sandboxy. There's no linear path, giving the players a lot of freedom. While some players might get straight to the correct goals and never deviate, they could technically be able to complete the adventure in a single session. I wouldn't count on it. Keepers should expect this to take 2 sessions. So players, from here on out, I'm going to be dropping the spoilers. So if you haven't played Blackwater Creek, I suggest you stop here. But tell your keepers to check it out. Now that the spoiler disclaimer is done, let's get down to business. First, let's talk about the good. Blackwater Creek has 2 varieties of villains. The first is mind-bending eldritch horror. The second is human beings. Both are seriously deadly, and combat is pretty much guaranteed. The module has 9 area locations. Because of its sandboxy nature, players don't have to visit them in any order, or even visit all of them to complete the adventure. In addition to the 9 scenes, the players will have a 10th scene that occurs when they get the job that sends them to Blackwater Creek. If the Miskatonic team has a possible 11th if they interview the insane grad student before leaving Arkham. So, 10 to 11 scenes is the reason I say that keepers should prepare for this to last 2 sessions. While the adventure is pretty thick, much of that space is actually Game Master tips on both rules and mood suggestions, which is very handy. I really appreciate how Chaosium has taken these extra steps. The maps are also very clear and well done, showing the overview of Blackwater Creek, the both Jarvie and Comedy farms, and finally the cave where the eldritch horror awaits. So props to Chaosium on some great maps. There's also quite a lot of art in the module. While some of that art is very good and very useful for showing players, not all of it was. While the residents of Blackwater Creek are afflicted with an otherworldly sickness, the pustules and gruesome details require spot-hidden rolls for the characters to notice. Meanwhile, the art makes them look more like the body horrors from a David Cronenberg film than the dirty residents of a backwoods town. Now, the art is a minor thing. However, the affliction, aka the mother's gift, could be a serious problem for some keepers. The plot of Blackwater Creek is that the corruption of Shub-Niggurath has tainted the water in the town. This means that all the food, water, and moonshine in the village has the potential of corrupting players every time they're exposed to it. There are 7 levels to this corruption, each one requiring a con check to avoid. There's a 2-hour window after each exposure before the characters need to save again. So therefore they could drink a glass of tainted water and not have to save after every sip, but they just have 2 hours to finish that glass before they have to do it again. But in theory, a single unfortunate character with bad con rolls could reach the final stage in under a single day. That's a big deal. Meanwhile, the townsfolk have lived with this for nearly 2 months and are only really showing the first few stages of corruption. This means that player characters have the potential of advancing far faster than anyone else in Blackwater Creek, even before they have to get up close and personal with the source of this tainted water. While the first 2 stages are actually pretty good, it quickly goes downhill from there. And the player that survives runs a serious risk of being a freakish abomination forever. While that's all well and good if this is a one-shot scenario with disposable characters, GMs that are using this adventure for a longer campaign might need to make some changes. My suggestion for those keepers is to either double the time between exposures, something like 2 hours between stages 1 and 2, 4 hours between stages 2 and 3, and then 8 hours between stages 3 and 4, etc., etc. Or they could have the corruption diminish by 2 stages once the mother's womb has been properly destroyed. Once again, this is entirely up to the keeper if they want to keep the characters for future adventures. Personally, I dropped the corruption by 1 level once the womb was taken out. The only remaining issue that I noticed wasn't much a note, but hey, this is a review, so here you go. First, the terribly mutated Brendan comedy has developed the power to control vermin. Neat skill. The module says that you have to refer to the Keeper's Guide for the stats on rat packs and venomous snakes. No big deal, but I found it a bit annoying that I have to pull out a second book. I mean, this adventure is 50 pages. It shouldn't have hurt them to add a half page more. The second is the pre-generated player characters. Personally, I don't use pre-gens, but many keepers do, especially if they're new or just looking for a good one-shot scenario. So props to Chaosium for making some great pre-gens. However, while nice, with detailed backstories and printable character sheets, the 6 characters are usable only if the keeper chooses the bootlegger scenario. There is no pre-gens for the Miskatonic scenario. While I understand that space is not infinite and that 6 pre-gens were already taking up 15 pages out of a 92-page book, the second scenario in the module, Misdoes, which is also a criminal-themed adventure, Misdoes provides 6 pre-generated characters as well. So that gives the entire module 12 criminal pre-gens, but 0 non-criminal pre-gens. While we are looking at 2 scenarios by 2 different authors, I believe that Chaosium should have made the call to have the 6 criminal pre-gens be usable by both scenarios and have 6 provided for the Miskatonic party in Blackwater Creek. Once again, this is a minor nitpick, but keepers might want to be aware. I already have my own party, so this didn't affect me at all. Since the game has 2 possible openings, and the setup is so characters can run through the 9 locations in any order, everyone's experience with Blackwater Creek will be vastly different. However, let me give you the quick rundown of how our group did it, as well as some changes that I had to make on the fly because of it. The characters were asked by Miskatonic University to locate the missing Professor Rhodes. They interviewed the grad students from the expedition, including the insane Walter Gehrig. They discovered Walt's madness and therefore began the adventure already knowing a little of the madness dealing with mothers. Great foreshadowing. Once they arrived, they headed straight to town, meeting the sheriff and the store owner and the children, and explored around a bit. After that, they headed over to the dig site, poked around, checked out the dry creek bed, and did some general exploring before making their way to the Jarvie farm. At the farm, they found the note, and then during the storm, old Pete went crazy and choked to death, while Malcolm Jarvie was gored to death by Brutus the maddened pig. Sufficiently freaked out, the PCs left the farm and found the Rhodes camp, which they learned of from Edith Jarvie. From the camp, they headed around to the dammed pond and witnessed the strangeness there. Then they followed the creek past all of the giant, deformed plants to the cave. Inside, they discovered the mother's womb. There was an incredible fight, 1 character died, but they managed to blow the cave and escape. The survivors are in pretty rough shape by then, so they drove the 6 miles west to Dunwich to get patched up. That was the first session. The next session began a few days later, once the characters had managed to heal some in Dunwich. They still hadn't found Dr. Rhodes and needed to return to Blackwater Creek. However, they'd already cleared 7 of the 9 locations, so I needed to buff it up a little. Also, I needed to figure out what had happened in those few days since they had killed the mother. So what I decided was that all of the moonshine that had already been shipped out had affected many of the people in the neighboring towns. Stage 4 of the corruption means that the afflicted is inexplicably drawn to Blackwater Creek. So on the drive back to town, they encountered several hitchhikers that were obviously showing signs of this corruption. Then when they got back to town, they realized that it had gone full-blown Children of the Corn level culty. With the mother dead, Sheriff Dick Sprouston had punished the Jarvies for taking in the outsiders that killed their god, crucifying them on crosses made from giant corn stalks before their collapsed cave. He had also put a serious bounty on the player characters' heads. Meanwhile, the flood of new believers coming into town were being used to manually dig the cave back open. Now, fearing for their lives, the characters bypassed the town and headed straight up through the woods. They encountered the horrors there. The dam was still intact, so the comedies were still using the pond water to irrigate their field. After some misadventures stealing a tractor, the characters tore down the dam and then set the field on fire. They charged through Hell's cornfield and assaulted the bootleggers in hopes of destroying the remaining whiskey. A huge battle ensued, barns exploded, fires raged, and somewhere in there they discovered Professor Rhodes. Their mission complete, the characters fled Blackwater Creek and called the federal authorities. The feds stormed in, and in a scene reminiscent of Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth, they put an end to Blackwater Creek. Professor Rhodes ended up in an asylum, and everyone else lived happily ever after. Sort of. Now, mileage may vary, and your PCs will likely approach this from completely different angles than mine did. However, if you do find yourself having to split the game over multiple sessions, I strongly suggest the influx of level 4 corrupted pilgrims from neighboring towns. That in of itself ratcheted up the level of terror for the PCs because they could see firsthand how this was a world-changing situation. Saving the world is always a great motivator. Those changes and my few complaints aside, Blackwater Creek is a solid adventure with a lot going for it. Keepers just need to be prepared in case it lasts a couple sessions and they need to buff it up more. And they need to be warned of the corruption just in case they need to use these characters again. Also, the Keeper screen pack is top notch, so I recommend you pick it up just for that, and you might as well play the adventure too. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to see more videos, please like and subscribe.